In Chapter 1, we talked about some of the trends we've been seeing in veterinary medicine that led to the Bayer Veterinary Care Usage Study. Now I want to start talking about some of the key findings. First of all, just a couple of words about the study itself. It was a 5-stage process, a very thorough study. We started with a literature review to see what other information had already been gathered by others. We did qualitative research with veterinarians, which means we actually met with veterinarians, talked to them about some of their concerns and the issues they were seeing. We did qualitative research with pet owners. Again, we talked with pet owners to find out what some of their concerns were about veterinary care and how they manage their pets' care. And then we had a quantitative research study with pet owners. So we had over 2,000 pet owners participate in an online survey. We then finished up with quantitative research with veterinarians. Over 400 veterinarians participated in an online survey discussing various issues and topics related to the care that pets were getting and the concerns that pet owners had. The research team consisted of Brackey Consulting, the National Commission on Veterinary Economic Issues, Ipsos Forward Research, who did the actual field work. We had a number of university consultants that we talked with so that we made sure we were asking the questions in a way best designed to gather the information we were looking for. And the study was overseen by the Bayer Marketing Research Department. We are obviously eternally grateful to Bayer for their financial support of this study. It's been an amazing process and just incredibly helpful results for the profession. Overall, there were 6 reasons why veterinary visits are declining. 3 of them we called environmental factors and 3 we called client factors. Environmental factors are things that are more difficult for us to change or to impact going forward. Although one of the environmental factors, the internet information, I really think spans both of the categories because there are things we can do there to change how clients use the internet or at least make sure that they get better information. We'll talk about all 6 of these factors as we go forward. Just briefly, obviously the recession is one of the reasons that visits are declining. That's a no-brainer. But fragmentation of veterinary services is another issue, and that simply means that there are more veterinarians out there providing more and different kinds of services, and so we're taking a declining number of veterinary visits and spreading it out over a greater number of people. Clients use the internet more to get information than they ever did before, and this is true not just in veterinary medicine, but in almost every other walk of life. So they don't always call their veterinarian first if they want some information about their pet's health care. Client factors included a lack of understanding of the need for care, and this was not a complete surprise. We've always known there are some clients out there who don't understand the need for veterinary care, but the number of clients who felt that way and the magnitude of their lack of understanding was a surprise. Definitely we're seeing sticker shock, we're seeing a pushback against the cost of veterinary medicine, and that's contributing to the decline in visits. And then we're also seeing feline resistance. And this is not a new issue, but it was very clear it's big in pet owners' minds, or in cat owners' minds, I should say. And I think when you combine it with the increasing cost of care and what appears to be an increase in the lack of understanding about the need for veterinary medicine, the feline resistance issue is an even bigger issue now than it used to be. So let's just talk very briefly about the recession. We all know it's impacted most practices. As you can see here, about 33% of practices said that there was a significant negative impact of the recession on their local economy, and another 51% said there was a moderate negative impact of the recession on their local economy. So only about 15% of practices said they were unaffected by the recession. And yet, what was interesting is that when we looked at practices that had actually seen an increase in visits over the last year or so, 68% of them had some impact of the recession. So what this tells us is we can't just say, oh, the recession is a problem, because there are more than a few practices that are growing in spite of the fact that the recession had an impact on their local economy. If we look at the attitudes of veterinarians toward the recession, one of the comments that I thought was most interesting is that about 12% of veterinarians fully agreed with the statement, when the economy recovers, my clinic's business will return to normal. And another 44% somewhat agreed with that statement. So we've got over half of practices who do feel that once the economy recovers, their practice is going to be back to business as usual. And I think this is a concerning attitude. Number one, I think it's going to be a long time before the economy is as strong as it was in 2006 and 2007. And secondly, I think we're seeing some structural changes in veterinary medicine and in what clients want. So I don't think we can just assume that once we get through our financial or our economic challenges, that everything is going to be the way that it used to be. I think practices are going to have to work harder now to provide the kind of care and the kind of service that clients want and to attract them back to their practice. Fragmentation was the second of the environmental factors, and what this really means is that there's more competition out there. And there's more competition simply because there are more veterinarians. When we ask practices about other organizations in their area that provide veterinary services, the average practice said there were 15.3 competing clinics in their trade area. Now, there were different kinds of practices that they considered to be at least somewhat in competition. The most prevalent was other independent practices, and so the average practice had 9.6 competing practices in their area. But there were also corporate clinics such as VCA or NVA, there were mobile vaccination clinics, pet store clinics such as Banfield, specialty referral clinics, and then also shelters or animal welfare organizations that also provide some level of veterinary care. So all of this means there's a fair amount of competition out there for every practice. One of the things that we talked to pet owners about in the pet owner part of the survey was the changes that veterinary practices could make in order to increase visits. And there were actually a number of things that pet owners felt fairly strongly about that would lead them to visit a veterinary practice more frequently. So this slide shows both the responses from dog owners and from cat owners. The top 4 responses were the same for dog owners as they were for cat owners, although the order varied a little bit and the percentages were slightly different. But still, what was important to dog owners was important to cat owners. One of the things that pet owners said would lead them to visit a veterinary practice more frequently was competitive product prices. And of course that makes sense. Products are more available than they used to be or more available in different places. Pet owners are aware of that. They know what prices are and they want to get a good price when they buy this stuff. The next of these services most likely to increase visits was the concept of wellness programs billed in monthly installments. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get farther on into the other chapters. But essentially what pet owners liked about the concept of a wellness program is that it's a bundle of services that their pet needs to stay healthy during a year, and they can pay for it over time. So they liked the fact that they knew up front what were the kinds of services they needed to provide to or for their pets in order to keep them healthy, but they also could spread out the payments. So instead of being hit with a $200 bill or a $300 bill or a $150 bill at one time, they could pay $25 or $50 or whatever over time, so over a year, and it spread out those payments. What's important to realize is that the average household income in the United States is about $50,000, and that's for a household of 2.3, 2.4 people. So we may not always think that $150 is a big amount, but if you have a household income of 50, writing a check for 150 or 200 or 300 can really hurt. And so being able to spread that out over time was important to pet owners. Another of the services most likely to increase visits included the concept of a full year health program. And what this really meant, the way it was described in the survey, was that at the time of a visit, a veterinarian would talk to the pet owner not just about the care that the pet was getting during the visit, but would talk about the care that the pet needed over the next year. So when it would need to visit, what kind of diagnostics it would need, what kind of preventatives it should be on, but also help the pet owner understand what kinds of things they could do at home in order to keep their pet healthy. So that might include diet or exercise, and also the kinds of signs and symptoms they should look for to recognize that there's something going on with the pet and maybe it needs to see a veterinarian. And that was very popular with the pet owners in this survey. The fourth of the top 4 services was extended business hours. And while pet owners said very much that they liked the idea of extended business hours, when we actually tested this in the veterinarian part of this survey, we didn't find strong evidence to indicate that it increases the number of visits. Now, individually, I've worked with practices with extended hours who have felt it's been very successful, but I've seen others who have felt that it hasn't helped them. So the evidence was a little bit wishy-washy on this. While pet owners really liked the idea Does it really make them visit practices more? That seems to be only true on a case-by-case basis. There were other things that were important to pet owners, but they weren't nearly as strong as these top 4 that we've talked about. So while definitely looking at convenience items like online appointment scheduling and days or times reserved only for cats or dogs, those can be very important to some clients, but you don't want to ignore the top changes in favor of these ones that were less important to pet owners. So if we combine now information from the pet owner part of the survey and from the veterinarian part of the survey, we can look at where opportunity really lies. So this slide shows many of the items that pet owners said were important to them, and then we compared that to what veterinarians said they were actually doing in their practices. So 47% of clients said that they would visit a veterinary practice more frequently if the practice offered competitive product prices. But 73% of veterinarians said they were already doing that. So yes, there are some veterinarians that could make that change, but that's something we're already doing in many, many practices. Now, if we look at the wellness program billed monthly, that was very popular with about 45% of the respondents to our survey, and yet only about 5% of practices are currently offering those programs. So clearly there's a big opportunity here. We have a mismatch between what clients say they want and what we're actually doing in practices. Another opportunity is the full year health plan. Again, about 39% of pet owners said that that was important to them, that would cause them to visit a veterinary practice more frequently, and yet only about 22% of practices are offering those. So again, a big opportunity here to do something that would draw clients in. Some other opportunities included offering more information about financing programs so that clients aren't obligated to pay all of that bill at the time of the visit. Online appointment scheduling, again, was something that appealed to about a quarter of pet owners, but only about 18% of practices are offering it. And pet health records online had a similar opportunity gap there. One of the things that was interesting was that about 29% of pet owners said that if a practice offered drop-off appointments, they would be more likely to visit, and yet 85% of practices already do this. So the gap there is not in that we don't offer a service that pet owners want. The gap is that we're clearly not communicating it. So they simply don't know we have that service, and yet if we were to communicate that better, promote it a little bit more, that was very appealing to almost a third of pet owners. Another interesting finding from this part of the survey is that about 28% of veterinarians said that they were not willing to make any of these changes. Now, what we don't know is, are those practices genuinely totally successful? Do they have high levels of profitability? Are they still seeing growth in clients, growth in transactions, growth in visits? Or do we have veterinarians who are simply unwilling to change? And the study wasn't able to differentiate between that, but certainly a message here is that we need to look at what our clients want, and we need to think about offering the things that they care about if we want our practices to continue to be successful. That's the end of Chapter 2, and when we come back in Chapter 3, we'll start talking about some of the specific solutions that were suggested by this study.